It's a great delight and pleasure to be part of this very pertinent, timely discussion, especially as someone who is very fond of global bridges and, of course, Beate Lindemann. Delighted to be here to talk about the future of artificial intelligence, how data intelligence is reshaping our world. And I couldn't have asked for a more formidable speaker when it comes to this subject matter. Young Sohn is here with us, a truly formidable, prominent, accomplished Silicon Valley entrepreneur and investor and former president, as Beate already mentioned, of Samsung Electronics. If I went through his CV, that would take up most of the time of our discussion here. We would be listing accomplishment after accomplishment within 60 minutes, but suffice to say that we are deeply gratified and honored to have him with us to talk about this very pertinent issue, Young, an issue that is shaping our lives on a daily basis. And you've been an active investor and operator in the tech field for the last several decades, and you've been truly at the forefront of this debate, of this AI debate. For those joining us and listening in, is there an agreed definition of AI, of what artificial intelligence is among the circles of those who've been shaping this debate and this journey, such as yourself?
Well, thank you, Ali, asking for a really good question. But I want to just start with the appreciating Global Bridges to hosting this event, and Dr. Lindemann for your leadership to make this happen today. And I'm honored to be in Berlin to discuss this very important topic. And I will just give them a little bit background before I talk about AI, the importance of data economy. Because just like oil without engine would not be that useful, data without AI would not be very useful. It's the AI that's making the sense out of data. Today, we're generating data that are incredible amount of what we call this intangible data that are coming out. We double our data every 2 years. And the truth is, only about 2.5% of the data is being analyzed and used, and that gives insight to our economy. But going forward, more and more these data are going to be useful from your phones, from the cloud, from your TV, from the way we live. All the IoT devices are going to give us the data. The issue is, what do you do with all the data? Obviously, we want to know more about what it means. To make it what it means is where AI is very useful. Artificial intelligence isn't about replacing human brains. It is about really using computers to make sense out of data that we are gathering, so that, example, if you are running a biotech, when you are developing drugs like vaccine, you can be able to accelerate development of drug discovery using what we call learning curve from the past experience, so that we can be able to harness the power of the learning to gather the outcome that can help us to accelerate innovation.
So it's very interesting what you say. Data is pretty much the fuel required to run the engine called AI. Without data, obviously, no AI. And big data, as you pointed out, Young, is transforming the world. But of course, with that come very tricky questions. One you've already pointed out, namely, what do we do with that information? What do we do with that data that is being assembled? And the topic of ethical AI particularly comes up in this regard. Tell us what ethical AI means to you.
I think this is a really an important question. It is, there are three things that we should really think about when we think about data. One is about privacy, the other one is about security, and the third one is about ethics. And what does ethics mean? Ethics means about trust. It's about our value systems. And we may have different value systems depending on region from other areas. But the important thing is, data does not lie. But how we interpret the data could be an issue. And imagine when you train your AI algorithm with a certain bias. Let's assume that high-performing management team in the past in an insurance company, traditionally, was a tall white man. You add that information into your system, and then what production you're going to get when you're looking at a month of training is going to predict certain people are going to do better than others. Is that the right ethics? It's about creating and eliminating bias that are in the system so that it is most neutral, it is most ethical way of representing the data. And I think we are in the era where much of what we are consuming will be influenced based on where the data is coming from. Because what you put it in is what comes out. It's what we call garbage in, garbage out, right? GIGO. So I think it's really important we think about what data is going in, not about AI. AI could be neutral algorithm. It's a question of what data that's going to create bias.
It's not the information itself, but what we do with it. But ethical AI is then, if I understand you correctly, debate. The debate is grounded in the concerns for privacy, I heard you say, data biases, and security. Let's go through them one by one, because all of them obviously take a big chunk and make up a whole chunk of what the debate is all about. Let's talk about privacy, an issue that is particularly sensitive here in Germany, of course. You are a Silicon Valley entrepreneur with perhaps a different mindset when it comes to privacy. In the US, you have those social media giants, Facebook, Google, Netflix, you name them. And they're all accumulating big chunks of data on a daily basis. That sometimes raises ethical questions about how this data is being used. Do you share the concerns on the part of Germans, for instance, that say, I'm not that comfortable about giving away all that information about myself on social media?
You know, I tend to believe that privacy is really important and it's a choice, but also it should not create a bias for the data that are being gathered for the commercial use first, and then when it gets trouble, that's when you address it. I think that's more of an American approach today. That is, let the platforms develop whatever work they're doing, and then only when it becomes an issue they confront. I think the GDPR has a really good, in my view, initiative. It just took a lot of time. It's very cumbersome. It could be much more efficient. But at the end of the day, though, it did think about that it should come in as not opt-in, not opt-out, because we should have a choice from the beginning that are more neutral rather than you're already signed up for something that you don't want to sign up.
Another interesting word you use is bias, bias in data in particular, and that we ought to avoid it. Could you be a bit more concrete? What is a concrete example of data bias?
Well, bias isn't really about the kind of things you want to put into system. For instance, there was a big project with Microsoft where they had a 10 million user pictures to be able to identify a project that was done some years ago, I think 2015. And the truth is, it had certain faces that was in there that was not meant to be because they didn't get the right opt-in. So eventually they want to get rid of that. But by the time they got to it, this same data being copied in multiple other databases, now you cannot control it. It's out there already. That's what I call bias. There are unintended consequences because data got gathered in some way, and then it was not controlled at that particular point. And by the time on the cleanup, it was not cleanable because it's already replicated all over internet.
And how do we eliminate those biases then?
What I think is really important is start with the data access and data permission, and it's about also how you be able to move data from one storage to another platform. All those things requires permission. You cannot just be able to buy and move those data, because data is what makes AI very useful, because you're training through your network, and it's basically neural network, which means the more data you have, the beneficial you get. For instance, think about your language processing capabilities. Like when I'm here, I can actually use my phone to speak English and being able to come out in German, a conversation, right? It can be done now, and it understands my English. and it comes out real time in German. All those capabilities cannot be done without AI, because it was trained by a number of people that are speaking English. So he understands syntax, he understands the nuance, he understands the accent, and then he translates it real time and being able to come out in Deutsch. And that capability is what makes AI very useful. And language is a great example of AI applications.
And I think it ought to be saying that your German is getting better by the day. So you're going to be using that app less and less, but it's good that it exists.
I'm not sure about that one. I think I have a long way to go.
It's coming along. Next year, same time, same place, we're going to do this conversation in German. But privacy and data biases are two aspects you mentioned. The third one, of course, a very pertinent one, security. And there's not a day that goes by where we don't see headlines of cybersecurity, cyber attacks, cyber threats that are being conducted. That's something that must give you cause for concern.
We should be all concerned. There are many bad actors that are doing terrifying stuff. The number of ransomware attacks, not thousands, not 100,000s. Now we are talking about millions and millions of attacks. And there are many people that are paying off to minimize the embarrassment, to minimize the risk, minimize the panic. It is already going on. It is a trillion economy. It's a big economy. It is one of the biggest extortions you can think of. So we should be all worried about this. But really, if you think about it, it's not just money. It's about the reputation. It's about your way of living. And how do you trust the system when you are not sure about your bank account, when you're not sure about your own information that are stored? Is it really yours when it gets compromised by security breach? And these are the kinds of things we should think about, because the phone we have in our pocket, it is a supercomputer. It has all your information. Imagine if that information is compromised about your living style, where you've been to, who you meet, all right, how late you go to your bar, all those things out there, right?
For sure, for sure. We're being monitored on a daily basis via phone, if you will, and that information can be accessed if the ill will is there, and it is frightening, and we should all be worried.
And I would want to say again, there are a lot of good things that can happen. For instance, based on how you look at your phones, you can actually detect certain behavior change. And based on that behavior change, you can also predict certain depression type of things. It is already being used, and there's many startups that are working on this particular area. So there are certain indicators you can be able to see trend. And based on the data, you can be able to project and predict. And that's where AI can be very useful as well.
Yeah, indeed. You said numerous times, I think it's very striking, that AI can be used for good or bad. At the end of the day, the technologies themselves are neutral and can be used for good measures to find a cure for a disease, or to steal $600 million of cryptocurrency somewhere out there. What's the solution then? Because good or bad has always existed in this world. Do we need tougher legislation? Do we need more outreach, more cooperation on an international level? What's the solution, Young?
First of all, I think where we are today is that, remember the Cold War between the US and Soviets with the nuclear arsenals?
Oh, we remember very well in this city,
yes,
for sure.
Yeah, that day is over. The game is changed. The game is really, it's a new game now. It's between those people that want to compromise your data and those people that want to defend. And it is a one-man ship. It's going up, and the games are up, the stakes are bigger, and the truth is, it's not just individuals. We're talking about states that are sponsoring these attacks, and that is scary.
That is scary indeed, and something that, in your opinion, states are well equipped to deal with, or rather not?
You know, often the bad actors come first, and then it wake you up. And I think that states should be more proactive in defending its citizens, defending its own infrastructure. Think about how you can just knock out all your electrical systems and then say, if you don't pay, we're not going to turn it on. That's exactly what happened in Texas last few months ago. So this is really happening real time.
Well, what do you say to those who say, you know, this talk about AI, I've been hearing it for 10 years now, always promising cutting edge technology, but at the end of the day, I'm running around with my iPhone here in Berlin and get 3G sometimes, you know. The automated cars are still a long way from being in practice, and so on and so forth. I mean, the promise of AI and the adventure of AI, if you will, has been shared with us for some time now. But if we look at a day-to-day basis, where do you see very concrete examples where it's already been very firmly implemented?
Well, first of all, I want to just say that AI by itself cannot do anything. AI is a software algorithm that are trained, but to enable to run it, you need to have a good infrastructure. You need to have a good network. And if you want to connect with the cloud, you need to have a good plumbing that can be able to move a lot of data. And I noticed in Germany that plumbing could be, you know, you could spend more money on this to make it go faster, right? With a faster plumbing, you can have more data, you can have better AI. So I think this is very fundamental global competitiveness for any country to invest in the broadband connections so that its citizens, its enterprise, its infrastructure can be competitive, number one. Right, that's really a fundamental, I think, important issue. Countries like Korea has done it. They are the fastest internet in the world. Singapore has done it, and others are catching up with it as well. So that's one aspect of very important competitiveness. Now, so AI by itself is not panacea. It's about computing speed, the storage. All those architecture have to be done right, and then we can be able to run it and be more efficient. The biggest AI application today, in my view, is actually the speech recognition applications. I told you about the Siri, about the Hey Alexa. All those things cannot be done without training huge number of data. And you may have heard about autonomous driving. Frankly, autonomous driving is not here to deployed, but many technology is there. And fundamental to autonomous is actually about camera. It's about detecting objects. It's about recognizing what object is and being able to know what the traffic patterns are and being able to map those so you can be able to avoid collision. You can avoid the right potholes. All those things are great example of the compute that are helping. But I also think the biology and technology, together we can discover drugs much faster. And I think that part of that is not just AI, but AI with quantum computing, we can be able to go much faster to discover some of these very difficult type of applications. I will give you another example. There are fertilizers. We had fertilizers for a long time. I think the actual invention of fertilizers are Germans, if I remember. And it was done a long time ago. That process of creating from nitrogen, the ammonia, in that process, it generates a lot of heat, a lot of byproducts, and we haven't figured out right catalyst that can be able to optimize that process. Because this is a chemistry, we have to understand number of molecules and being able to check back and forth which one is compatible. With the AI, I believe you can accelerate and finding the right agent much faster than we could have. The reason for that is now we have a new quantum compute that can be able to run multi-variables simultaneously in parallel.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my research for this talk, I came across a number that was truly astounding to me. 98% of data is untouched every year, goes wasted, goes not used, rather. So what you're talking about then, we have to find a better way of digesting that data much faster, but there are limitations, aren't there?
You know, think about 19th century, the oil. The oil has been around 2,000 years. I think first oil was discovered in Iraq, right? 2,000 years ago, but oil was not very useful. And then once they figured out how to process it, and then they also then applied application of these petrol products, the nylon came out, plastic came out, container came out, all those byproducts came out. We are in that journey with data. We're in a very early stage. We are trying to curate the data, trying to process it, and then we're trying to create what it means. And eventually, with enough data, we'll know about our body. see what's going on. And we'll have a much more proactive indication of our health than going to see a doctor when you have real problems. And how do you change from reactive to proactive? That is a huge implication to our health, also economic impact.
Very, very interesting that you say we're only at the beginning of this journey, which of course begs the question then, where are we in the next, say, 5 years or 10 years? You are visionary, you are at the forefront of this debate, you are one of those shaping this debate. Where are we headed if this is just the beginning?
Well, it's a very exciting time actually if you're a technologist, because now we can solve problems that we couldn't solve before. We can be able to have a bigger impact. For instance, just doing a huge climate modeling simulation, it takes huge compute power. It just takes too long. And I think there's ways we can solve those things with new compute. So in my view, there are a few key megatrends that will be able to have a huge impact on. One, I think that VR, AR, what we call mixed world, virtual reality with the reality, I think we will see more of that opportunities coming. If you talk to a lot of teenagers, they spend less time on social media now, and they spend more in metaverse. Metaverse is where it's a virtual world. They're creating their own universe of products, towns, geography, and their own world of living, or gaming. So whether we like it or not, this is really what's happening. And that cannot be done without the technology that we talked about with immersive experience, whether it's the VR glasses, or AR could be very useful as well. AR glasses like Oculus could help you to improve your surgery, for instance, because you can see exactly what you're doing along with your glass, along with the instructions that are right next to each other. So that type of things would be really exciting. I think that I also talked about importance of quantum compute. Really the benefit of quantum compute is very simple. Traditional compute is a von Neumann architecture where it's really binary, 0 and 1. And it is the compute that we've been relying on last 50 years. But the quantum compute, it may not be a solution for everything, but it has many, many quantum bits in between. So we can be able to solve many problems in parallel and simultaneously. And that has some advantage of bringing new capabilities that we couldn't do, like drug discovery that I mentioned earlier. So in many ways, it's really exciting because technology can improve and help some of the new discovery that we couldn't do before.
So there's some big technological innovation trends that are coming that will improve our lives, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of improving our lives, you yourself, you have launched the Extreme Tech Challenge, the XTC. Tell those viewers out there what it's about.
All right, so XTC is about creating a global community of entrepreneurs to work on UN 17 sustainability impact programs and creating the largest competition in the world to help them to educate, to share, and to learn from each other so that we have more entrepreneurs can be able to make a bigger impact in contributing to better health, better food, better inclusion, all those better air, all those sustainability issues that we are challenged, including climate, of course. All those things cannot be done just government initiative, just thinking about it. Frankly, I think we are paralyzed. The way we need to mobilize and solving these big issues are that we need to get entrepreneurs involved. We need to get those brains to think about how to solve these problems in non-traditional way so that we can be able to attack these problems indirectly rather than just waiting for it to happen. The global warming is real. Average temperature went up by over 1.5 degrees last time that we have measured. And you see the new report just came out last week, indicates all the scientists believe that we are in a very dire state and we have to do something. It's my way of contributing by mobilizing what I know, which is entrepreneurship and ecosystem, and getting them engaged.
So the XTC is the world's largest startup ecosystem for purpose-driven innovation. You're supporting these young entrepreneurs who are contributing to a better world, to a more sustainable world?
I'll give you a really concrete example.
Please.
One of the winners last year was Microgen. It's a company out of Ireland. And it was a female entrepreneur, scientist, who believed that toxins in soil is the number one problem for our nutrition. In fact, as you know, about 35% of all the soil out there has heavy metals in it. And how do you protect from these toxic material is a big issue. And what she have developed is a biome that can coat this seed. In the process, you can be able to protect it and grow much faster than what can be done, for instance. The other example would be for Rewire. You're an Israeli company, it's a fintech, enabling migrants that are coming over, whether it's Syrians or even Indonesians or Indians that are coming different places, when they have no history. How do you open a bank? Without opening a bank, how do you transmit money to your home? And it's solving that problems, and having them a banking for those that are underprivileged, being able to reach with their homes, being able to share, and being able to have a credit, being able to have their identity. And it is an inclusive kind of tools that I believe that can change the world.
One thing that interests me, of course, Young, you are a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, born in Korea, but you were raised in the US. You made your mark, shaped the AI and technological debate in the US at the heart of technology and innovation. You've been in Germany for a year now, more or less?
Yeah, I'm pandemic refugee.
He's a pandemic refugee. Well, we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
What are some of the biggest differences looking at the US, but also Korea? You mentioned Korea and its strong infrastructure, and Germany, which is often viewed and thought of as a country that is lagging and is a few steps behind when it comes to digitalization. What are some of the starkest differences that you have encountered during your time here in Germany?
Well, I would say just I feel very welcomed in Berlin. So I would just say that it's very open and very engaging community with many creative people. So I see a lot of creativity compared to Silicon Valley, to be honest, in art perspective. Now, when it comes to business perspective, I have been working with a number of German companies and of course US and Korean companies and others. I think the innovation is more boxed in. So more incremental innovation that are more measured and tested and then go one step at a time. I think Silicon Valley innovation is about throwing everything away and then starting from new. So open is very noisy, it's not very obvious, but then they come out with some really interesting ideas from out-of-box. So out-of-box culture with the in-control box culture. Korea is somewhat similar to Germany than actually, I would say, US, but Korea is somewhere in between.
Yeah, you were very courteous and diplomatic, of course, and so let me rephrase my question then, because again, in Germany, the debate is that we sort of have overslept this trend, right? That we are lagging behind, as I said, not just globally, but even in Europe, and you see it from the way that the topic of digitalization is distributed to three main ministries here, for instance. There are three ministers who are in charge of this very vital and future-oriented topic of digitalization. What is missing here that you see is existing, say, in the US when it comes to AI and digitalization?
I mean, obviously government is important, but I think more important is really having a right infrastructure. So, being able to Zoom without getting dropped is important. And
well, we haven't been dropped yet, so that's good.
Goodness.
20 more minutes.
Yeah. And on the top of that, I think it's really important to have a right incentive system so that entrepreneurs can be able to show their success. For instance, I think Germany has option grants that are taxed at income. And I think in the US, they don't tax you when you get granted. They only tax you when you realize the gain, which means they're willing to take more risk. And I think it's risk-taking culture is really important when it comes to digitalization, because digital economy is very different than what made Germany successful, which is more analog-driven. What does that mean? When I say analog-driven, means I love this the strengths of German economy based on the craftsmanship, being able to build the best knife, best lens. All those things are what I call analog-driven technologies that are very, very difficult to make and very difficult to replace. But in digital world, you mix and match. You don't really have to worry about which digital bit is better than this particular thing. It's about combination and taking risk. In that mixed culture of digitalization, the assets of analog culture, it doesn't shine as much. It may slow you down. And this could be a dilemma of the successful analog country that are migrating into the new digital age that are moving at much faster speed.
You actually met Chancellor Merkel. You spoken with her. What was the topic about? What did you guys speak about?
Well, it was 2017, so a few years ago. She was very well prepared to discuss IoT. She was very concerned about the compromise of what I call the operating system that are driven by the forces of American platform companies, or maybe even Chinese platform companies, and the question of what is European standard, what is European approach for running all this digitalization and the OS that are required that can give you the privacy, that can give you the security, that can give you the kind of independence that Europe wants. And I think she was very much worried about that, and she once talked with us when I was president of Samsung regarding how we can collaborate.
If Chancellor Merkel were to come to you, I mean, she's only in office for another 6 weeks. If the successor, whoever it may be, from September 26th on would come to you and say, listen, we in Germany, we still have some homework to do when it comes to AI and digitalization, what would your advice be?
Well, I think that that would be a little premature for me. I think I need to learn more about where the Germany is, and then being able to provide the proper discussions around that. But I would be happy to engage.
Well, certainly anyone would be happy to make use of your expertise. Young.